The search is over!
Cleopatra's legendary tomb discovered in Egypt.
The past holds many secrets, and we're here to uncover them. Join us on this epic historical journey. Like, subscribe, and be part of the discovery. Back in November 1922, a young boy was walking through the mountains of the Egyptian desert when he stumbled across ancient stone steps carved into the rock.
That moment turned into one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time.
The steps led to the untouched tomb of King Tutankhamun. Archaeologists found around 5,000 artifacts inside, including jewelry, painted fabrics, and funerary masks. You've probably seen one of them. They've become iconic symbols of ancient Egypt. Now, over 100 years later, humanity might be on the verge of another massive discovery, the tomb of Cleopatra.
Cleopatra was the last active ruler of Egypt's Ptolemaic kingdom, reigning from 51 to 30 BCE. Though many ancient records describe her reign and remarkable personality, no one has ever found her final resting place, until possibly now.
Dr. Kathleen Martinez, an archaeologist, has spent decades studying ancient records and temples around Alexandria. She eventually concluded that Cleopatra's tomb must be buried beneath the ancient city of Taposiris Magna, which was founded in 280 BCE. This once thriving city on Egypt's northern coast was a hub of trade and industry.
Turns out, my hunch might have been right. My team and I discovered a hidden underground tunnel near Alexandria, stretching about 0.8 miles long and carved into the rock beneath the temple of Taposiris Magna. During further excavations, we found several items suggesting Cleopatra's tomb lies deep within the tunnel.
There's also a chance she was buried alongside the Roman leader Mark Antony. According to ancient records, Cleopatra and Antony were lovers who stood together against the Roman Senate, which had declared Antony a traitor. Unfortunately, natural disasters over the centuries have damaged much of Taposiris Magna. Earthquakes and floods may have flooded the underground tunnels, complicating the excavation process.
Still, we're hopeful the tomb remains intact and filled with treasures and historical records. While water and mud may slow down the digging and require major funding and time, we believe it'll be worth the effort.
It's too early to say for sure if Cleopatra is actually buried there, but they've already found a number of clues in the tunnel. Pottery, dozens of coins bearing her image and that of Alexander the Great, and even a bust that may represent Egypt.
At one point, I was in a conflict with my brother around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I knew I couldn't win against him directly, so I came up with a clever plan to win over Julius Caesar.
When the Roman leader arrived in Alexandria, Cleopatra wanted to meet him, but Caesar already suspected her intentions and almost stopped her from coming. So instead of showing up in a grand, flashy way, Cleopatra chose to arrive in secret. She wrapped herself in a rug, which was then carried by her servants straight into Caesar's private quarters.
When I emerged from the rug, Caesar was stunned, both by my boldness and my beauty.
That bold move sparked a romance between them, and the two became allies. Later on, for diplomatic reasons, Cleopatra set her sights on another powerful Roman, Mark Antony.
To impress him, I arrived on a golden boat with purple sails and silver decorations. I was dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, sitting under an elaborate canopy. My servants, dressed like cupids, fanned me and burned incense.
She staged this dramatic entrance because she knew Antony admired Greek mythology and even saw himself as a version of Dionysus. He was so impressed by her that he eventually married her.
Cleopatra used this alliance to protect her crown and strengthen ties with Rome. Together we had 3 children. We lived in Egypt, threw lavish parties, and enjoyed wealth and power.
But their relationship caused a scandal in Rome. Octavian, Antony's main rival for power, used the situation to damage his reputation. Through propaganda, he painted Cleopatra as a cunning seductress who had Antony under her spell. The Roman Senate supported Octavian, and in 33 BCE they declared Cleopatra an enemy of Rome. The conflict came to a head when Antony's fleet clashed with Octavian's navy. Octavian won the battle, forcing Antony and Cleopatra to flee back to Egypt.
According to some records, we took refuge near Alexandria, but were pursued by the Romans and eventually hid in one of my palaces, where my story came to a tragic end.
Some legends say Cleopatra, an expert in poisons, provoked a venomous snake, possibly a cobra, to bite her. Other stories suggest she pricked herself with a poison needle. There's even a theory that she kept a vial of poison hidden in her hairbrush, and when she was cornered, she dipped the needle in it and used it on herself. None of these stories can be confirmed for sure. Scientists are still trying to uncover the truth. Maybe once Cleopatra's tomb is found, we'll finally get more answers about her mysterious and tragic death.
I was the last ruler of ancient Egypt. After my death, Octavian looted my palaces and temples, then returned to Rome, where he became the empire's first emperor. He ruled successfully and expanded Rome's borders. His reign ended when he died at age 75.
History could have turned out very differently if Cleopatra and Antony had won that final naval battle. By the way, did you know that more time passed between Cleopatra's reign and Neil Armstrong's moon landing than between her reign and the building of the Great Pyramid of Giza? Armstrong set foot on the moon in 1969, 2,038 years after Cleopatra's birth. But the Great Pyramid was built in 2560 BCE, over 2,000 years before Cleopatra was even born. That just shows how incredibly long Egypt's history is. Cleopatra is closer in time to us than she is to the pyramids. Flashback to 1898, a curious discovery in Saqqara. It's the year 1898, and you're taking part in an excavation in Saqqara, not far from Cairo. The area is full of ancient tombs and pyramids. You feel like Indiana Jones, hoping to uncover something incredible, maybe golden scrolls, treasure maps, or royal mummies, but instead you find a small wooden bird. At first, it's a huge disappointment. It looks like just an ordinary toy. Little do you know that years later, someone would suggest that this bird might actually be a model of an ancient glider or early aircraft. Known as the Saqqara bird, it's made from sycamore wood, has a wingspan of just 7 inches, about 18 cm, and weighs around 40 grams. It would make a pretty cool souvenir, but that's not what makes it special. The bird is over 2,000 years old and looks very simple. No detailed feather carvings or flashy decorations. It has a beak and 2 eyes, giving it the look of a falcon, which was a symbol of the god Horus. Its tail is quite strange. It's square and sticks up in an odd way. There's also a hollowed-out part that may have once held a now-lost piece. Humans love a good mystery, so over the years there have been many theories about what the bird was used for. One idea is that it was a ceremonial object. Another is that it was just a child's toy from a wealthy family. Some think it could have been a boomerang or a throwing toy, which were common in ancient Egypt. The mystery started to unravel when people realized the Saqqara bird didn't have any holes or markings, other than the one added later by the Cairo Museum, so they could mount it on a stick for display. This means it wasn't originally meant to be hung up in the past. Almost a century after the bird was found, an Egyptologist named Dr. Khalil MSA came up with a new theory. What if it was a model of an ancient monoplane? He pointed out that the bird seemed to be missing a horizontal stabilizer, like a tail fin, but the wings were set at a right angle, just like modern aircraft, so maybe it could have generated lift and actually flown. Dr. MSA also mentioned that back then it was common to place small-scale models of inventions or tools in tombs. So, could the ancient Egyptians have really invented a prototype of the airplane around 200 BCE? That would definitely give the Wright brothers something to think about, since their first flight didn't happen until 1903. There's only one way to know for sure: test the model. But of course the Cairo Museum wasn't going to let anyone launch one of its prized artifacts into the air like a toy, so a glider designer named Martin Gregory built a replica out of balsa wood. He concluded that even with a tail, the model didn't fly all that well. Case closed? Not quite. That wasn't enough to convince the History Channel, so they brought in an aerodynamics expert to build another replica. This time it was tested under weather conditions similar to Egypt's. Surprisingly, it performed well. The expert was impressed by how capable the little bird was. If it really was a prototype for an aircraft, that would make it a perfect example of what's called an out-of-place artifact, an object way ahead of its time in terms of technology. And the Saqqara bird isn't the only example of that kind of ancient innovation. Back in 1901, divers recovered something called the Antikythera mechanism from a shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. It's now considered the world's first analog computer, and dates back to around 100 BCE. This bronze device could track the positions of the sun, moon, planets and stars, predict eclipses and even calculate how fast the moon moved across the sky. No one knows for sure who used it, how it was made or exactly where it came from, but one thing's clear, it was incredibly accurate and way ahead of its time. Think flushing toilets are a modern invention? Think again. The world's first flush toilets were not created in the 20th century. Actually, the ancient Minoans on the island of Crete and the Indus Valley civilization both came up with working toilet systems over 4,000 years ago. Their plumbing and sanitation systems were so advanced that it took over 2,000 years before anyone could design something better. At the Palace of Knossos, for example, archaeologists discovered an ancient toilet that had a wooden seat built over a tunnel. Water from a rooftop tank would flush waste underground. Most people just used a jug of water, but if you had a flush toilet back then, it meant you were seriously rich. Basically, owning one was like living in the Beverly Hills of the Bronze Age, and automatic doors, you'd think they were a 20th century invention, first introduced in 1931. But in reality, the technology goes all the way back to the 1st century CE. Heron of Alexandria, a mathematician and engineer, designed a hydraulic system to open and close temple doors. Here's how it worked. You lit a fire to generate heat under a copper pot that was half filled with water. That heat created steam and pressure, which moved water into a set of containers acting as weights. As the containers got heavier, they pulled ropes that opened the temple doors. Okay, it didn't exactly open instantly like modern supermarket doors. It took hours, and there was no way to stop it once it started. So they only opened the doors once a day to add a bit of theatrical mystery during temple ceremonies. Now here's something really wild. The first battery might have been invented in Baghdad about 2,000 years ago. In 1938, a German archaeologist found an odd oval-shaped clay jar. No one's totally sure what it was for or who invented it, but some scientists believe it was used for electroplating, coating objects in precious metals. When filled with a weak acid like vinegar, the battery produced about 1 volt of electricity. Others think it might have just been used to store sacred scrolls. Either way, pretty mind-blowing. Oh, and if you thought contact lenses were a recent thing, Leonardo da Vinci actually sketched out a design for them way back in 1508. He imagined a glass lens with a funnel on one side that you'd fill with water and place over your eye to improve vision. Not the comfiest idea, right? A century later, a French scientist named René Descartes tried to improve the concept by designing lenses that would actually touch the surface of the eye, basically the first step toward modern contact lenses. He used a glass tube filled with liquid to improve focus, but the big problem, you couldn't blink. Thanks to new glass-making technology, scientists were able to design contact lenses that actually fit the eye and even let people blink while wearing them. Sounds great, right? The only problem, they were made of heavy-blown glass that didn't let the eyes breathe. About 50 years later, things improved. Lenses became lightweight like plastic, unbreakable and scratch-resistant, but they still covered the entire eye. Then in 1948, a British optical technician accidentally sanded down a plastic lens and discovered that it could stay in place even if it only covered the cornea. Game changer. Now imagine you lived in 19th century London and wanted to send a message to New York. That would have taken about 10 days by ship. So when delivery time dropped from days to hours in 1858, people were blown away. Even Queen Victoria sent the very first message herself. It was all thanks to the transatlantic telegraph cable which ran under the ocean. Unfortunately, that amazing invention only worked for a few weeks before breaking down, and it took years to fix and relaunch it. Here's a creepy discovery from Egypt a few years ago. Archaeologists found 16 human right hands, carefully buried in 4 strange pits.
At first, they didn't even look like human hands because they were so unusually large.
Even weirder, there were only right hands, no left ones in sight. Turns out this points to an ancient dark ritual.
Egyptian art and records tell of ceremonies where soldiers would cut off the right hands of their enemies to prove victory, and then trade them in for gold.
The Egyptians believed in an afterlife, so cutting off someone's hand was thought to take away their power forever. brutal but effective. This particular battle had been between the Egyptians and the Hyksos, a people who lived in what we now call Canaan. Egypt has always been a hotspot for discoveries that rewrite history. A while ago, researchers found an ancient papyrus scroll that, if unrolled, would be about the height of the world's shortest skyscraper, which, by the way, is in Wichita Falls, Texas. Before we had apps like Notes, people wrote on papyrus made from the pulp of the papyrus plant about 2,000 years ago. The scroll contained texts describing traditions, beliefs about the afterlife, and rituals. It's considered one of the most important documents from ancient Egypt, and you can still find versions of it in bookstores today. The scroll was discovered in a chamber south of Djoser's pyramid in Saqqara. Yep, not the pyramids of Giza, like most people think. Djoser's is actually the oldest pyramid in Egypt. Saqqara has been buzzing with archaeological excitement lately. Recently, they found what might be one of Egypt's oldest intact mummies. Experts believe the well-preserved body belonged to a wealthy man. He was buried deep in a shaft, wrapped in layers of gold leaf. All signs pointed to him being rich and important. The headband he wore, the chest bracelet, and the special embalming method that was usually reserved for Egypt's elite, the coolest part. The tomb was still sealed with mortar, exactly as it had been 4,300 years ago. That's why archaeologists were thrilled when they finally unearthed the base of the pyramid again, under 25 feet of sand. Meanwhile, American archaeologists have been working on a cemetery in Egypt that could contain over 1 million mummies. So far, they've uncovered around 1,700 of them. Unlike the royal mummies we usually hear about, these people weren't kings or queens. The pharaohs were actually ordinary people who lived about 1,500 years ago, during the time when Egypt was under Roman and Byzantine rule. The name of one tomb sounds amazing, Buffalo Way, just in case you want to check it out on your next trip. That lost pyramid was originally discovered around 1800 by a German archaeologist in the village of Saqqara. He called it the Headless Pyramid, but over time, desert sands buried it completely. There were a few digs in the 19th and 20th centuries, but they weren't systematic. The Apis bull had to meet some very specific criteria. It had to be completely black with just one white mark between its horns. Priests hand-picked them, worshipped them in life, and then mummified and buried them with honor after death, in massive underground tombs. It crumbled over 4,000 years, and today only its base remains. Still, the area was hugely significant in ancient times. Near that pyramid, priests once held special ceremonies carrying mummified bulls which were considered sacred. These bulls, known as Apis bulls, were believed to be earthly representations of a god from Memphis, the ancient Egyptian city. Sounds wild, but back in 2008, archaeologists even discovered a lost pyramid, which unfortunately is now gone. Besides bulls and buffalo, the ancient Egyptians were also really into baboons. Yeah, there's a bit of a theme here. In the early 20th century, archaeologists found a site full of mummified baboons in a place called the Valley of the Monkeys. Now, Egyptians didn't just mummify any animal, only the ones they considered sacred. Some animals were more important than others because they were connected to specific gods. For example, jackals were linked to Anubis, the god of the afterlife, and cats were associated with female deities. Baboons were a big deal, too. They were believed to be connected to Thoth, the god of wisdom and advisor to Ra, one of Egypt's top gods. But here's the sad part. Archaeologists believe these baboons were kept indoors, deprived of sunlight most of their lives, and suffered from severe vitamin D deficiency. They were also poorly fed. Maybe Thoth was angry at the people who cared for them, just a thought. But there's never a dull moment for archaeologists in Egypt. They also found human mummies with golden tongues. Egyptians believed strongly in the afterlife, and the idea was that a golden tongue could help someone speak once they crossed over to the other side. Seems like a long shot, but hey, why not? Some of these mummies were buried in wooden coffins with items like necklaces, pottery artifacts, gold lotus-shaped decorations, scarab beetles, and just kidding, iPhones. A new temple was also discovered recently, and experts think it was dedicated to Zeus, or more accurately, a fusion of Zeus, the Greek sky god, and Mount Cassios. While digging around the Sinai Peninsula, archaeologists uncovered 2 pink granite columns sticking out of the ground. They believe these columns were part of the temple's front gate, which collapsed long ago during an earthquake. Speaking of gods, Some weren't that scary. A golden ring was recently found in a city south of Cairo, and it had the image of bees, the god of fun and joy. He's often depicted in ancient texts as a cheerful, chubby dwarf. These days, many people get tattoos just for looks, but in ancient Egypt, women got tattoos as symbols of protection during childbirth. At least that's what scientists think. In the Nile region, a researcher discovered mummies with well-preserved tattoos, which is super rare since skin breaks down easily over time. 2 of these women had tattoos on their lower backs. Simple designs, mostly images like that same happy little dwarf bees, who also served as a protector for women in labor. Now, would you believe me if I told you that the ancient Egyptians invented robots? Okay, not quite, but they were brilliant astronomers, mathematicians and engineers. And somehow they also made a mechanical god. Some scholars have nicknamed it Hor. This wooden statue sat in the Metropolitan Museum of Art for years before anyone noticed it had an internal mechanical system. With help from an X-ray specialist, they found a pulley system inside it, connecting the statue's shoulder to its left leg. When the mechanism moves, the statue raises and lowers its hand like it's saying, "Pick me, pick me." Let's talk pyramids. The Great Pyramid was built as the final resting place for the Egyptian king Khufu. According to legend, when Napoleon entered the Great Pyramid, he came out visibly shaken and pale. He never told anyone what he saw in there, but whatever it was, it supposedly haunted him for the rest of his life. To get to the inner chamber, Napoleon would have passed through a narrow ascending passage, then through a longer one known as the Grand Gallery, and finally into the King's Chamber, the heart of the pyramid. This chamber was lined with massive granite blocks, but it probably didn't look as majestic as we imagine. There weren't any hieroglyphs on the walls. Egyptians didn't start decorating pyramid rooms until much later. Pharaoh tombs deep inside the pyramids were once packed with treasures, from gold to some of the world's most precious jewels. But sadly, most of it was looted long ago. The only thing that might have been left behind is... who knows? Subscribe and explore the forgotten past with us. Like, comment and support our journey to uncover the truth and the adventures of the ancients. See ya.